Last Tuesday, I was grabbing coffee with an old colleague who, by any standard, is a catch-fit, high-earning, and articulate. But as we talked, he pulled out his phone, not to show me a dating app, but to highlight a headline about the December 2025 Census Bureau report. His eyes weren't filled with the anxiety you'd expect. They were bright, almost triumphant. "Look at this," he said, pointing to the death cross where married households finally plummeted to 47%. "The market is finally liquidating. I'm out, and honestly, it's the most peaceful I've ever been." He described his life with a kind of detached aesthetic precision. He spends his evenings in what he calls ascetic mode, perfecting his physique, managing his digital assets, and interacting with a customized AI companion that provides what he calls micromance without the liquidity lock of a real relationship. He didn't look like a man who had failed. He looked like a man who had staged a strategic withdrawal. He spoke about the collapse of the traditional family not as a tragedy, but as a logical market correction. To him, the evolutionary mismatch was finally being solved by technology, and he felt a deep-down satisfaction in simply refusing to play a rigged game. But then the tone shifted. I mentioned the old Universe 25 mouse experiments, the ones where the society collapses because the males stop competing and start doing nothing but eating and grooming. For a second, his smug composure flickered. He stared at his own reflection in his darkened phone screen, smoothing his hair with a practiced, rhythmic motion. "The beautiful ones," he whispered, a strange half-smile on his face. "We're just becoming the beautiful ones." That instantaneous shift from celebrating digital sovereignty to acknowledging a biological dead end is the pulse of our current moment. We aren't just looking at a demographic shift or a dating crisis. We are witnessing the final AI-driven harvest of the human social fabric. When the cost of participation in society exceeds the perceived biological returns, the system doesn't just break, it enters a behavioral sink. Today we're going to look at why the 47% endgame isn't just a statistic, but a sociological verdict on the future of our species.
That anecdote just perfectly frames what we're trying to do in this deep dive.
It's everything in one moment, isn't it?
It is. We're really trying to analyze this correlation, between that 2025 decline in marriage rates and this older, much darker theory of the behavioral sink.
To see if social atomization really does lead to this kind of collapse.
Exactly. We're going to take that stark 47% number and connect it to three really core fundamental forces. First, as you mentioned, we have to look at the legacy of the behavioral sink experiment. What does it actually tell us about social breakdown under stress? Second, we're going to investigate how these AI companions, this micromance, really function as a kind of a market clearing mechanism for what's called the Sexual Gini Coefficient.
Right, this idea of liquidity lock that he mentioned.
Yeah.
Avoiding the risk of a real relationship.
That's the one. It's about low stakes, tech-mediated connection. And third, we're going to evaluate this whole shift away from traditional courtship and towards something else. A pursuit of a competence hierarchy, a kind of stoic psychological sovereignty.
So is this a rational response to the world we live in now?
That's the question. Our goal here is to give you, the listener, the full context, to move beyond just dating anxiety and into what this really means for the future.
Okay, so let's start there. That 47% census number is the big flashing warning light, but your colleague's reference to the beautiful ones, that takes us right back to the ghost of Universe 25.
John B. Calhoun's behavioral sink experiments. Yeah. It's a theory that, it absolutely terrified a generation for a reason.
Let's lay out what actually happened in that experiment.
What's so fascinating is how simple the setup was, but how profound the results were. He started this work back in the late 1950s, and it went on for decades. The whole idea was to explore the link between population density and social health.
So he takes these lab rodents, mice and rats, and puts them in these controlled environments.
Correct. And this is the critical part. He provided them with everything. Absolutely everything they needed for biological survival. Unlimited food, endless water, plenty of nesting materials. There were no predators, no disease.
It's utopia. He basically eliminated all the traditional pressures of evolution. No hunger, no danger.
It was designed to be a paradise, an enclosed utopia. The only constraint was space.
But not just physical space, right?
No, that's the key distinction. It was the social space. The inability to get away from other mice, the inability to form new, viable social groups away from the main cluster.
And this is where he coined that term, the behavioral sink.
Exactly. It came from his early experiments with rats. He described this bizarre phenomenon where the animals, even when there was plenty of room elsewhere in the enclosure, they would just pathologically crowd together in these dense, chaotic knots, usually around the feeding areas.
Like they couldn't help themselves.
They couldn't. And you're right. At first, the population boomed. It followed this perfect, predictable, exponential curve. He called these the striving and exploitation phases. But the disruption started way before they ran out of physical room.
That's the most chilling part. It wasn't about a lack of resources.
Not at all. That's the core takeaway. The boom was always, in every experiment, followed by a complete psychological and social collapse. The pathology wasn't caused by starvation or fighting over food. It was caused by social stress. The sheer stress of constant, unavoidable interaction.
An inability to form working relationships.
Right, and that breakdown led inevitably to extinction. The behavioral sink is that sociological horror show, a chaotic mix of extreme violence, total withdrawal, and just complete non-functionality.
And the specific behaviors are what make the analogy so powerful today. It wasn't just a die-off, it was how they fell apart.
And this is why Calhoun's work was so controversial. He intentionally used language that blurred the line between the rodents and humans, and the behaviors mapped onto our own social pathologies almost perfectly.
So in these late stages of growth, you start to see these distinct abnormal groups emerge.
Yes, and you mentioned the first group, the ones your colleague identified with, the beautiful ones.
These are the males who just checked out.
Completely. They stopped competing for anything. Not for females, not for territory, not for social status. Their entire world just shrank down to the self.
They opted out of the dominance hierarchy.
Yeah.
The game was over for them.
Their sole purpose became, in a way, aesthetic maintenance. All they did was eat, drink, and groom. They would obsessively groom their own fur, smoothing it until it was perfect. That's where the name comes from.
Physically healthy, but socially and reproductively dead.
Exactly. They were biologically surviving, but they had completely abandoned every social role. It was this strange, narcissistic, self-contained existence.
And that resonates so strongly with the ascetic mode my colleague described. Perfecting the physique, managing digital assets, but completely removed from the risk of the social game.
It's a very powerful modern analogy. Then you had another group, the social dropouts. Calhoun sometimes called them the somnambulists or the autistics.
It's a sleepwalker.
Yes, these were the subordinate animals who just retreated psychologically. They would huddle together in a big, vacant mass, physically present but mentally gone. They were surviving, sure, but they were totally unable to breed or engage in any normal social behavior.
So the whole social structure was just dissolving. What was happening with the females during all this?
This is perhaps the most devastating part, the impact on the next generation. The females, they were under constant stress from all the social encounters, from the breakdown of male territories, and they started to neglect their infants.
How so?
They failed to build proper nests. They'd show violent or just careless behavior towards their own pups. Infant mortality, it rose to an astonishing 96%.
96%. So the colony was literally unable to reproduce itself?
It was over. And this is the crucial point. The damage was permanent. The crowded rodents lost the ability to coexist forever. Even when the population crashed and there was tons of space again, the survivors couldn't recover. They couldn't remember how to form functional relationships.
The skills were just gone.
The ability to mother, the ability to court a partner, these fundamental social skills were permanently lost. And that led to the irreversible collapse of the colony.
So it wasn't temporary. It felt almost epigenetic. A societal memory wipe.
You can see why when Calhoun published this, especially in Scientific American in 1962, it wasn't just some interesting science paper. It became a cultural blueprint for understanding everything people feared in the 60s and 70s.
Urban decay, overcrowding, social breakdown.
It became a core cultural touchstone. It fused all these intense anxieties about the population bomb scare with the very visible stress of urban crowding, the failures of social architecture like the Pruitt-Ago housing project. It was the perfect storm.
And the visual of rats, which already symbolized urban decay, just amplified the whole thing.
Massively.
Yeah.
The behavioral sink became a shorthand for this coming apocalypse of over-civilization. And his language, as we said, was key. He called the aggressive, hypersexual males juvenile delinquents, or probers. The social escapists were barflies or social drinkers. He was making the connection explicit.
So the popular takeaway was just pure pessimism. Density equals pathology. The end.
And that's the critical nuance that gets missed when people bring up Universe 25 today. The popular, sensationalist view became the myth. You pack them in, they collapse. But Calhoun himself, he actually grew really frustrated with that simplistic interpretation.
Oh, really?
Yeah. His later work, which almost nobody paid attention to, was all about amelioration. He wasn't a prophet of doom. He was trying to design better spaces that would foster collaboration and intelligence. He argued that population growth wasn't inherently bad if you designed social structures correctly to respect the animal's evolved needs.
So the positive message got completely buried by the horror story.
Completely. And that brings us right to the main criticism of applying this theory to our modern situation.
Right. Critics say it wasn't just density.
Exactly. They argue the collapse happened because the design of the enclosure, the very architecture of Universe 25, fundamentally undermined the mice's natural social structure. They're polygamous, they're territorial.
And the space didn't allow for that.
It made it impossible. The dominant males couldn't defend their harems because everyone was just piled on top of each other. The subordinate males couldn't escape the constant competition. That's what drove the pathology.
So if the problem was structural, a flawed social environment, then the analogy forces us to look at the design of our own social environment.
And today, the primary designer of our mating structures isn't an architect, it's an algorithm.
Which takes us straight into the hyper-efficient and hyper-brutal digital mating market.
Right. Let's unpack that. If the old ways are failing, what does this new algorithmically designed space tell us about what happens when you remove all the old frictions from human mating?
We're basically looking at the raw data of this market liquidation my colleague was celebrating.
And the very first thing the data confirms on every platform is this profound gender asymmetry in selection. It's an incredible digital amplification of our evolved behaviors.
Women are the primary selectors.
Overwhelmingly so. This lines up perfectly with parental investment theory, which we'll get into, but you can see it starkly in the numbers.
Okay, let's quantify that. The studies on initiation rates on these apps, the difference in effort versus selectivity is just mind-blowing.
It really is. The data shows that men are casting this hugely wide, optimistic net. They're just trying to get past that first selection barrier. They swipe right, or like approximately 61.9% of the profiles they see.
Nearly 2/3.
Yeah. They're playing a numbers game. They'll filter later at the response level if they even get one.
And women.
Women showed extreme selectivity. They liked a mere 4.5% of the men they saw.
Less than 1 in 20.
Far less. And what this tells you is that women are doing their filtering preemptively. It's happening at the profile level, and it's based on instantly visible traits.
The activity levels confirm this too, right? Men are just initiating way more.
Way more. Some analyses even suggest the gender ratio of active users in this market, the people actually sending messages, is closer to 80.20 men to women.
And this inherent selectivity, blown up to a global scale by the platforms, this is what leads to the statistical climax of the whole thing. The Sexual Gini Coefficient.
Yeah. Before we get to the number, let's just quickly define what that is for everyone listening.
Right. The Gini coefficient is an economic tool. Measures inequality.
Exactly. It runs from 0 to 1. 0 is perfect equality. Everyone has the same amount of wealth. 1 is maximum inequality. One person has absolutely everything.
We use it to compare income distribution in different countries. So applying it to desirability or sexual capital on an app, what does a high score mean?
It means that a tiny, tiny fraction of users are getting an overwhelming majority of all the attention, all the likes, all the matches, and it leaves almost nothing for everybody else.
Okay, so what's the number?
When you apply this to the distribution of likes in the dating app economy, the measured inequality is greater than 95.1% of all the world's national economies.
Wait, say that again?
The inequality is greater than in 95% of all countries on Earth, as measured by wealth distribution.
That is just, it's stunning. The distribution of desirability on these apps is more unequal than the distribution of actual money in almost every country on the planet.
The digital market has created a winner-take-all environment that makes global capitalism look, frankly, equitable by comparison.
And the implication of that is a built-in structural failure for the average user.
It has to be. The data shows that the vast majority of women, specifically the top 78% of them, were all fiercely competing for matches with just the top 20% of men.
So you have this huge imbalance.
It's a structural collapse. It means the average male user is facing the mathematical certainty of failure. The data shows the average guy can expect a like from slightly less than 1% of the women he sees.
One response for every 100 swipes. That right there explains the mass withdrawal. Why would you spend any effort in a system where the odds are that stacked against you?
It's a rational cost-benefit analysis, and this whole outcome is driven by what you could call the digital tyranny of preference.
What do you mean by that?
Well, the environment of swiping is, by its nature, low information and high volume. Your attention span is measured in seconds, so the initial filter has to be based on the most visually striking and easily quantifiable things.
Physical attractiveness, obviously, is number one. But what specific attributes become these hard, non-negotiable filters?
Things you can quantify, things that signal resource potential. Height is the classic example. The data indicates that 90% of women swipe right on men who are over 6 feet tall.
90%.
It becomes a quick, brutally efficient filter. A woman's stated preference for a long-term partner might be very nuanced and complex, but in the rapid-fire market, the initial selection skews heavily toward these quantifiable visual aesthetics.
What about personality? Surely things like humor, intelligence, shared values, they have to matter for a real connection, right?
They do, but not at this stage, not in the initial market phase. The studies we looked at, using pretty sophisticated regression models, found that personality features had surprisingly low predictive power for success, meaning actually getting messages.
So the algorithms can't even really measure it effectively.
It's not that they can't measure it. It's that in the initial selection phase, it accounts for less than a quarter of the indicators for success when compared to physical traits. What you look like, your height, your apparent athleticism, that rules the day in the first few seconds.
Were there any interesting gender differences in the secondary traits that did predict success?
Yes, and they're very telling. For women receiving messages, the most important factors were age and athleticism. This aligns with the finding that women are evaluated more on looks and youth.
Biological markers of health and fertility.
Exactly. For men, being clever and having a positive user drinking level were the only noteworthy positive predictors.
So men are signaling status through intelligence or social conformity, I guess.
You could see it that way. While women are judged on biology, it's a very traditional dynamic, just accelerated to light speed.
So this hyper-efficient market creates this extreme inequality. It drives up standards to an impossible level, and it makes finding a partner untenable for millions. And this is where that concept of micromance your colleague mentioned comes in. It's the technological escape hatch.
Precisely. If the real-world dating market is too expensive in time, in rejection, and the risk of commitment, then technology offers a bypass. Micromance, engaging with an AI companion, is a highly efficient market-clearing mechanism. It provides reliable emotional and intellectual intimacy without any of the high costs.
And without the liquidity lock.
Yes, that's a perfect term for it. Liquidity lock refers to the legal, financial, and emotional entrapment that commitment represents. Your assets are locked, your time is locked, your freedom is locked. By choosing a micromance, you optimize for maximum personal freedom.
The breakup rate is 0. Rejection is 0.
And financial liability is minimal. This choice, this reliable, low-risk digital gratification, it also promotes a kind of perpetual seeking in the real world. Why would you commit to a flawed human when the opportunity cost of stopping the search for a perfect partner or a perfect AI alternative is just so high?
Which means the breakup rates for couples who do meet on apps must be
twice as high. The data shows they're twice as likely to break up as couples who meet through traditional social networks. The mere perception of available, appealing alternatives predicts low commitment. The search never really ends.
So now we have to pivot to the why. The deep foundational conflict driving all of this.
The biological and economic collision. And this is best framed by the concept of evolutionary mismatch.
Which is basically an old, previously good trait becoming a bad trait because the world changed too fast.
That's a great way to put it. Our instincts are betraying us. We evolved for the savannah, but now we're living in a spreadsheet.
You see it everywhere.
Everywhere. The classic example is the thrifty gene. An adaptation that helped our ancestors store energy to survive famine. A huge advantage. But in our modern world of Uber Eats and desk jobs, that same gene leads directly to obesity and diabetes.
So the mismatch we're talking about here isn't about food. It's the clash between our evolved mating strategies and this brutal, unequal modern economy.
And to understand that strategy, you have to start with the bedrock principle, parental investment theory, or PIT.
Developed by the biologist Robert Trivers. This is the core of why gender differences in mating selectivity evolved in the first place.
Right. Let's break down that investment calculation. The reason females are the principal selectors is because the female investment is high, it's risky, and it's fixed.
9 months of gestation, the dangers of childbirth, the years of rearing.
It's a massive, obligatory biological cost. And that mandates selectivity. Sociologically, you could call it hypergamy, the drive to ensure your partner provides reliable resources, protection, and stability that either matches or ideally exceeds the huge investment you're making.
A bad choice for a female is catastrophic. It could mean the death of her or her offspring, so she needs to see signals that the male is high status and reliable.
Correct. The drive is for high parental investment from the male. This is why men are driven to display these high-cost signals, the expensive suit, the nice car, climbing the corporate ladder. It's all a display designed to pass the female's filter.
And for men, the low-investing sex, the strategy is all about competition for access to those high-investing females.
Exactly. Male investment is low, flexible, and repeatable. So the main reproductive challenge for men throughout history has been competing effectively for access. This is what drives male ambition, strength, resource acquisition. It's all fueled by female selectivity.
Okay, so this fundamental evolved hypergamic drive is now crashing head-on into a massive economic crisis that is systemically undermining male status.
The gender status reversal. This is the critical factor that's pouring gasoline on the fire of that digital market failure.
The old economic hierarchy that hypergamy relied on, the assumption that the man would almost always be the higher-earning, more educated partner, is just eroding.
It's eroding with incredible speed. You see this dramatic shift. Women now make up about 60% of all college students in the West.
And as a direct result, their earning potential is changing.
Dramatically. The median woman is increasingly beginning to out-earn the median man in the prime working age demographic, or at the very least, she's matching him.
So women's own attainment is rising, which means their demand for a high-status partner, the hypogamic standard, is also rising. But the available supply of men who can meet that new, elevated standard is shrinking.
The goalposts have moved up, but for a huge number of men, the economic tools they need to even reach them have been taken away.
And at the same time, the economic foundation for many men is just crumbling.
It is. We're seeing a huge portion of the male working age population just not in the traditional workforce. About 1/6 of prime working age men, that's 25 to 54, are either unemployed or completely out of the labor force.
And their living arrangements reflect this.
They do. More men between 18 and 34 are now living with their parents than are living with a romantic partner.
So the outcome seems unavoidable. The evolutionary impulse for hypergamy is still there, but the supply of men who are perceived as high status is dwindling. This creates a catastrophic matching problem, and it institutionalizes that 80-20 split we saw in the dating app data.
The traditional contract is failing because it's built on an economic structure that just doesn't exist for a huge part of the younger generation.
And these failures are what push people toward that rational choice to just opt out. A decision made almost necessary by the collapse of the intergenerational contract.
Yes, younger generations feel and are financially sold out.
Let's talk about the specific economic hurdles that force this.
The implicit agreement used to be that economic benefits and contributions would balance out over your lifetime. That social contract has been torn up. Policies have overwhelmingly favored asset accumulation for the older population while deferring enormous costs onto the young.
Can we put some numbers to that? The figures for a place like the UK illustrate this trend pretty clearly.
Yeah, and while these are UK-specific, they tell a story that's true for nearly every Western nation. The intergenerational contract is broken. Younger generations are on the hook for an estimated £2.7 trillion in national debt and a truly staggering $6.4 trillion in unfunded pension liabilities.
That is an unbelievable debt transfer. It must create a psychological crisis where you feel like all your effort is just going to pay off someone else's commitments.
And that systemic failure then shows up directly in the inability to hit traditional life milestones. Start with student debt. The average UK graduate is carrying about £45,600 in debt.
So you start your career deep in the red. It kills your ability to save, to build capital.
It's a mortgage before you can even think about a mortgage. And that brings us to the next huge structural block, housing.
The big one.
Average lifetime housing costs for young people are now 3 times higher relative to their income than they were for the boomer generation. National house prices are around 8 times the average salary. Without a huge handout from family, homeownership, the cornerstone of family stability, is structurally impossible for most people under 45.
And even if you somehow clear that hurdle and get a home, the need for 2 incomes creates the next impossible problem: children.
If both partners have to work full-time just to pay the mortgage, childcare becomes a non-negotiable expense. In the UK, it's the third highest in the world. It can eat up to 75% of a median couple's take-home pay.
75%.
It's a financial brick wall. It just stops family formation cold. It's why the UK has a record low fertility rate of 1.44. Young couples are effectively financially infertile. They can't afford the traditional family unit.
Which brings us to the ultimate motivation collapse. Why would you work yourself to the bone 60, 80, 100 hours a week, risk your health, when the traditional reward for all that striving to stable family is financially impossible and, as many see it, legally hazardous?
The entire narrative that men work hard to provide for a family is fundamentally broken. And for men who are opting out of the mating market, this removes the historical engine of male ambition. If the reward structure is gone, what's the point of climbing the professional ladder? The focus shifts entirely to personal freedom and risk mitigation.
It becomes a rational opt-out.
The only logical choice for many.
So this convergence of systemic failure, hypergamy inflation, and these impossible economic hurdles, it leads millions to make a self-optimizing choice. Withdrawal. You see it in things like chaos celibacy for women, and of course the MGTOW movement for men.
MGTOW, men going their own way. It's a socio-political movement that really grew out of the online manosphere, and it's rooted in this idea of self-preservation.
Its core idea is maximizing male autonomy.
Exactly, and deliberately rejecting all these societal expectations that say a man's worth is tied to his role as a provider and a partner.
So they see long-term relationships, especially marriage, as just massive containers of risk.
Right.
Financial, legal, emotional risk.
That is the absolute crux of their argument. The grievances are heavily focused on family court and divorce statistics. They use the term divorce rate to describe what they see as guaranteed financial devastation.
And we should be clear, we're reporting their perception here. They feel the system is rigged.
Yes. They perceive it as being structurally biased against the high-earning male, turning what should be a partnership into a huge legal liability that can be weaponized against them.
What are the main anxieties driving them to withdraw?
The sources point to three main areas of perceived risk. First is social ostracization, the fear that a partner has the social power to destroy a man's reputation or career. Second is the loss of assets in court, which they see as bias due to what they call gynoentrism, a legal system focused on female-centric needs.
And the third?
Emotional betrayal. They often see emotional pain as a tool used to manipulate a man and keep him in that traditional provider role. So their withdrawal is framed, at least internally, as an act of necessary self-defense against a hostile system.
It's a philosophy born from risk avoidance. And the practical ideal that comes out of this is the gray man. This sounds a lot like my colleague's ascetic mode.
It's the same principle. The gray man seeks total sovereignty by becoming invisible. He minimizes his social footprint, avoids entanglements, tries to pass through life undetected by the taxman, the government, a potential partner, all seen as sources of risk.
And the energy that used to go into competition is redirected.
Entirely. It's redirected into self-directed hobbies and meticulous financial planning. The goal is often early retirement, maybe between 30 and 40. It's like the FIRE movement, but with a specific antisocial, risk-averse motivation.
And they frame this as a kind of enlightenment, a choice to stop being a slave on the plantation, which is their term for a man just playing the traditional provider role.
The victory isn't winning the game, it's leaving the game entirely. The goal is unconstrained personal autonomy, building a life where you don't need external validation from anyone.
But there's a real contradiction here, isn't there? This idea of hybrid masculinity. They reject the traditional roles of husband and provider, but they seem to uphold a very traditional gender order.
That is the core paradox, and it's what makes it so interesting to sociologists. They reject the restrictive roles, right? The provider role is the plantation. But the traits they value in their gray man ideal, self-sufficiency, aggression, intelligence, physical strength, these are hyper-traditional, even essentialized male traits.
So they reject the contract, but they keep the hierarchy. And this lets them adopt a kind of marginalized identity.
Exactly. They position themselves as the victims of this oppressive gynoentrist society to mask their own historically dominant position. It frames their withdrawal as a necessary act of self-defense against a rigged system.
But we have to pause here because there's a common misperception in this narrative. The MGTOW view often suggests that a few high-status chads are monopolizing the market, causing this rise in male celibacy. But the data doesn't actually support that.
No, it doesn't. Detailed longitudinal studies contradict this. The data shows that the concentration of sexual activity among the top 20% of men has actually been remarkably stable over time.
So if it's not a few guys having all the sex, what is the overwhelming statistical reason that more men are not partnering up?
It's overwhelmingly the increasing delay of marriage. It's that simple. The share of men aged 22 to 35 who have never been married is higher now than at any point since the late 1800s. And statistically, unmarried people just have less sex than married people.
So as marriage gets pushed later and later into the mid-30s and beyond, the overall rate of sexlessness just has to go up.
It grows naturally, regardless of what the top 20% are doing. However,
what's the nuance there?
There is. Within that group of never married men, the reasons for their celibacy are shifting. And this is where you see the market failure. The data shows a sharp rise in involuntary celibacy, with men citing a lack of a suitable partner. This confirms there's a growing group of men who are being forced out of intimacy because of that structural matching problem we talked about.
So what does this all mean? The collapse of the contract is driven by this deep psychological shift, a rejection of the external dominance hierarchy in favor of an internal psychological sovereignty.
And the pursuit of a merit-based competence hierarchy. But we have to acknowledge the criticisms of that idea, too.
Right. The idea that people at the top are always the most competent is optimistic.
It is. Critics would point out that external factors like inheritance, nepotism, family connections, even just being born physically attractive, these things often determine success far more than pure competence.
The system isn't a true meritocracy.
And that structural unfairness, combined with the collapse of real economic opportunity for the average person, is what makes leaving the market seem so rational. It becomes a calculated retreat to protect your assets and your sanity.
And this path of mass individualism, while it optimizes for personal freedom, it risks trading collective continuity for personal autonomy. And technology is stepping in to fill the void.
AI companionship, micromance, advanced fertility tech, the next generation could be built almost entirely outside the old social contract.
So our deep dive really reveals that this 47% threshold, it's not just a statistic. It's the clear manifestation of a radical market failure.
You have our evolved mating strategies, especially hypergamy, just clashing violently with a structurally unequal modern economy that's loaded with debt and unaffordable housing.
So the individual choice to opt out, whether you call yourself a beautiful one in ascetic mode or a gray man seeking digital sovereignty, is a profoundly rational, risk-mitigating response to a broken system.
It's the logical conclusion when you apply economic scarcity to our evolved instincts. And this systemic withdrawal is now challenging demographic stability itself. The mass move toward individualism is creating this huge socio-demographic vacuum, and it's threatening the very social contract that's held us together for centuries.
It's interesting. The historic solution to the surplus male problem was monogamy. It was maybe the most important social technology we ever invented. By saying even the highest status man could only have one wife, it ensured a more equitable distribution of women.
And that brought huge benefits. Greater social stability, lower crime rates, more cooperation throughout the culture.
But the hyper-efficiency of the digital market, combined with the gender status reversal and the death of the provider contract, it's effectively dismantled that technology. Now the top men are visible to all women all at once. And you get the massive inequality we saw in the Gini coefficient.
We're re-experiencing the surplus male problem.
And that frustrated energy, it isn't channeling into competition for resources anymore. It's channeling into a conscious, rational, and technologically supported secession from the social contract itself. We are witnessing the intentional unraveling of the social fabric, all driven by the cold, hard logic of self-preservation.